With 2025 training camp right around the corner, how good of a job did the Dolphins do in addressing some of their primary offseason objectives? We're exploring that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins with FanDuel. Today on the show, we are looking at the 2025 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint objectives. If you were an everydayer and have been for a while, you probably remember we had 5 primary objectives that I wanted to achieve in looking at the Dolphins offseason and how to proceed healthily from this point moving forward. And I would certainly say the price for the blueprint this year, free agent dollars got crazy, right? So it became operating within a certain kind of budget. And the irony of the Minkah Fitzpatrick deal was his price point was about approximately what I was willing to spend on like a Trayvon Marrig in free agency. So you stuck on budget there. But this was a very fiscally responsible, long-term view look for the Dolphins. And some of this was kind of spurred on by some of the conversations that I had with people who were familiar, let's just put it that way, familiar with how the Dolphins viewed their offseason in the early phases when they were beginning to set their plan on what everything was going to look like. That included there being a primary focus on young talent, fiscal responsibility, and a primary focus on this year's NFL draft class serving as a foundational draft class. That was some of the feedback in February that I had gotten from those that were privy to some of the conversation about what direction the Dolphins were going to go this offseason, right? So that helped me when I did the 2025 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint back in the first week of March. It helped me come up with 5 primary offseason objectives. And those 5 primary offseason objectives were mitigate injury risk, salary cap health, let's get more physical, let's get younger, and we want more dogs. We want more temperature setters in our locker room. And I think each one of those 5 individual phases, there's things that you can look at and feel as though the Dolphins made progress on those fronts. Now, it's not a sweeping, complete change, and that's because you have certain commitments to players that are prohibitive and prevent you from completely moving on. There's things, the salary cap perspective, that reset, unless you're going to tear everything down like you did in 2018 to 2019, which teams just don't do because of the amount of time it then takes you to claw back out of that. It's a gradual process. So we're going to look at each one of those 5, and we're going to ask ourselves the question, what was done to facilitate positive changes in these 5 objectives for the offseason that I had come up with for my simulated offseason? So let's start with the salary cap health element of this, the long-term view and focus. And what I can tell you is the Jalen Ramsey to Minkah Fitzpatrick exchange is healthy for multiple reasons. The first and foremost being you had deferred so much Jalen Ramsey money for 2023 and 2024. He was on the books for less than $3 million in cap space when you acquired him in 2023. And he got $10 million in compensation. And then he got $26 million in compensation. And I believe he was on the salary cap books for $8 million in 2024. So you were -7 and you were -25 in 2 years on Jalen Ramsey cash versus cap. You have to take your medicine with that. And the Dolphins are. But they're off the hook for the $21 million in compensation that he was set to receive. Now they paid some. They ended up paying $7 million out. It doesn't make it a good contract. It was not a good contract rework that they did last fall. But to get out of it and to replace it with a Minkah Fitzpatrick with $32 million in compensation over the next 2 years combined, none of it guaranteed, none of it currently prorated out, that's the win for the Dolphins. Because they could restructure a couple of other contracts and not touch Minkah, and then they can move on from him and save $17.6 million next year if they need to, or if it goes well and you're happy with it, you could sign him to a contract extension and he could be a 3-year piece of your next bill, right? But you'll have people that look at the Dolphins salary cap table for 2026 and express their concerns based on their current liabilities. And some of that's with Tua Tagovailoa and a contract that we're not sure if we want to be restructuring because he needs to inspire with his play. But you have Tyreek Hill with $36 million in compensation next year. None of it guaranteed. You could move on from Tyreek and you could save a significant sum of salary cap space. You could move on from Minkah and save $17 million in cap space if you want to go younger in that spot. You'll have an opportunity to move on from Bradley Chubb with or without post-June 1st opportunities. What you choose to do from there, now you're really kind of into the young nucleus of the team, right? You don't have too many. This was when they had the big influx in secondary contract, in second and third big money contracts. You say, well, you have a progression plan where you have guys that are coming up into and graduating into second contracts, and you phase out the old contracts as that happens. And we've seen that. Now, would we have liked to have locked in a few more of the core players that were drafted here? Absolutely. But from a salary cap health perspective, before you do anything with the Tua Tagovailoa contract, you can transition away from Tyreek Hill, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Jordan Brooks, and have about $36.5 million in cap space. Now, you're banking on Jalen Phillips potentially being brought back, so that will cost some money. Gator Kohu's an expiring contract. That's really it for the prominent names. So this pendulum of outgoing talent and cap restrictions, it's evening out. And that's the objective of having better salary cap health, which is one of the 2025 offseason blueprint objectives. Now, we're getting into the rest of these objectives, the other 4. That's next here on Locked on Dolphins. So make sure you guys stick with us. Summer sports are in full swing, whether you're about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action. FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburnt on the beach. You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events if your eyes are on some of the NFL futures. The Dolphins, if you are inspired that this team is going to win the conference championship game this year, it's plus 4,200. That is better odds than the Browns, Titans, Jets, and Raiders. And you're knocking on the door of the Patriots and the Colts. So the betting odds do not see the Dolphins favorably. And with a playoff drought, as long as the one that the Dolphins have, it's kind of hard to blame them. But if you're feeling lucky, and if you feel like the Dolphins are going to be lucky, plus 4,200 Dolphins conference championship. So if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can get $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. So let's go to this next objective that we had here, which is mitigate injury risk. And I think there's more give and take here than there is with the salary cap health. I think the salary cap health, you look at and see what their free agent strategy was. You see the influx in cost-controlled talents, the limited contract restructures and deferment of more funds to create more space, although they'll have to do some of that to be compliant for the season. I would say that one's pretty healthily in the yes box, not a surprise. I want to look at some of the names in place that are new. Darren Waller. Do I feel like Darren Waller is a mitigated injury risk? No, he was retired last year, in part because his body was banged up. Is James Daniels a mitigated injury risk? If he wasn't coming off of the Achilles, I'd be very inclined to say yes, but he is coming off of a torn Achilles. So there is some level of injury risk that exists in that regard. Now, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine and his style of play relative to Odell Beckham as the name that was supposed to be the 11 personnel guy last year, and obviously a second-year player in Malik Washington as your top 4 wide receivers to go with Waddle and Hill. I do think that you had success in that regard, mitigating injury risk. Now, for Tua Tagovailoa, part of mitigating injury risk is having a better backup in place. I think the raw talent of Zach Wilson is absolutely the best that the Dolphins have had since Mike McDaniel's been here from a raw physical ability standpoint. Now, the execution of it, that's another story. It's hard to say. I think anytime you can transition away from 30-plus-year-old corners, it is a mitigated injury risk. And so you're not as talented, not even close at corner. But for Kendall Fuller looked like a late-stage career corner at the end of the year last year. Jalen Ramsey did not finish the year as strong as he started. As a guy that's in the back nine. Now, lots of football left in that man, and we'll see what he does in Pittsburgh this year. But I think it's certainly fair for me to say, hey, the younger players, you probably have less in the way of injury risk because none of these guys are screaming red flags for medical issues, and you got younger. And that's going to tease into one of the other objectives that we had, which was actually get younger. Calais Campbell, the snap count limitations that exist there, I think you're a little bit more free there, but you did not change any of the dynamics in the edge room with Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips. So there's give and take here. There are certain rooms that I look at and I say, yes, I think you're much better protected. Javon Holland's been banged up the last couple of years. He's out. Minkah Fitzpatrick in. Yafitu Melifonwu, though, comes with a lot of red tape as far as injury risk. So I don't feel like this one's as overwhelming as a win for the Dolphins. But as we look at the next objective, we did salary cap health, we did mitigate injury risk. How about let's get physical? Are the Dolphins a more physical football team right now than what they were last year? And I think this is where you look at Westbrook-Ikhine as the third wide receiver. I look at Savaianaya and James Daniels as the guards and their style of play. I look at Larry Borum versus Kendall Lamb. I think Kendall Lamb's a better, more proven player, but Borum's a more physical player. I see Pharaoh Brown as competition for the inline tight end spot and the upgrade over Durham Smythe. I think that is an upgrade. I think that's a more physical player. I look at Alexander Madison and Ollie Gordon in the running back room. I look at Kenneth Grant and Jordan Phillips and Zeke Biggers as these 320-plus pound defensive linemen in place of Deshaun Hand and buoying Benito Jones a little bit. I look at KJ Britt as a plug off-ball linebacker. I look at Artie Burns, Dante Trader, Jason Marshall, Melifonwu, I think Minkah Fitzpatrick, sometimes the tackling consistencies, as far as like form tackling, can be hit or miss at times. You're definitely not as physical without Jalen Ramsey at corner. I think that's the one that I look at and say, hey, maybe we made some concessions in physicality. But I think Patrick Paul can be as physical as Teron Armstead, especially as Teron, his whole MO as a pass protector is, I want to eliminate you without putting my hands on you as much as I can. I can look up and down the roster and identify more physical players in just about every room. Just about every room. And I think players outgoing that you felt like, man, that's a really physical player that you're going to feel their absence. For me, it's probably Jalen Ramsey, Jonnu Smith. Although Pharaoh Brown, in a different role in the tight end room, I think is more physical than Jonnu Smith as a blocker. Now everybody's worried about who's going to catch the football. But between Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, Malik Washington getting 50 targets, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine potentially getting 50, 60 targets, like you should have enough bodies there for 400 targets and be fine. I didn't mention Darren Waller. Who knows? I didn't mention the other tight ends. They're not going to be really volume players. So I think from a physicality perspective, I would not say it's as clear-cut as the long-term salary cap health. But I would say in the pecking order of the three that we've done, I think you did a better job of getting more physical than you did mitigating injury risk. Because part of your salary cap benefit is looking for talent that can help you compete and be competitive now. But that comes with some red tape for those players to be available and not paying a premium to acquire them. And that's been part of the thing that's bit the Dolphins in years past. And they're taking their own respective risks with it again. But it's not as profound of risks, and it's more limited with what's at stake. As far as, you're protected more. You're not going to really regret, I think, any of these moves that you brought in because you're going to be handcuffed by them. We have two more. Let's get younger and more dogs. As far as getting younger, I want to make sure I have the Dolphins' official numbers here. So the Dolphins, as of right now, with their off-season roster, are currently the tied for the seventh youngest roster in football with the New England Patriots and the LA Chargers. It's Green Bay 25.3, New York Jets 25.5, Eagles, Jaguars, Ravens 25.7. That's top five. The Las Vegas Raiders are 25.8 in sixth place all alone, and then the Patriots, Chargers, and Dolphins at 25.7. A far contrast to the nearly average age of 28 years old for the Washington Commanders. Now, you go back to 2024, and the Dolphins were the fourth oldest roster in football. And the older players that they've brought in, obviously they bring in Darren Waller with kind of an unexpected pivot, if you will. But the oldest players on the roster, Joe Cardona, the long snapper. Okay, right? 10-year vet long snapper. I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep of that being an older guy. 33 years old. Darren Waller, 33 years old, coming out of retirement. It appears as though he has no guaranteed money in his contract. Pharaoh Brown, 31, signed in free agency. Tyreek Hill, 31. Those are the only players on the roster that are over the age of 30. There's four. Three of them are new, two tight ends, one of them being an inline blocking player, and Joe Cardona, and then obviously the big financial commitments you've made to Tyreek Hill. You contrast that to the young players. Jordan Phillips is 21. Ollie Gordon's 21. Kenneth Grant's 22. Chop Robinson from last year's 22. Jalen Wright from last year's 22. Dante Trader this year's 22. Like those are guys that are draft selections that you expect to hold meaningful contributions within your room. Achane and Malik Washington are 24. We'll see with some of the other undrafted free agents. I just did a piece for A to Z on a couple of guys that I think could maybe make some noise on the 53. That includes a couple of receivers. And Theo Weiss, Andrew Armstrong, potentially. Jalen Conyers at tight end. Patrick Paul's 25. Make sure I give the full glow up here for guys on the younger side. Jalen Phillips is 26. Austin Jackson's 26. Melifonwu's 26. Larry Borum's 26. Zach Wilson's 26. Ryan Stonehouse is 26. KJ Britt's 26. Matthew Butler, they brought in off waivers, is 26. Kohu, Waddle, Tungavaloa, 27 to go with Tyrell Dotson's 27. Jordan Brooks, 28. Aaron Brewer, 28. James Daniels, 28. You're young. You're younger. You're much younger. There's no Calais Campbells here, which is part of the process, I would imagine, and why they transitioned away from Calais Campbell, despite, I think, the budget probably being friendly to bring him back. But they had him on a significant snap count limitation. I think you saw it at the end of the year. They tried to let him play to get the sack totals, and you could tell he was a late-stage player pushing 40 down the stretch when he played the higher volume. And I don't think they wanted that, which gets into getting younger and why that was an objective. Now we're going to get into more dogs, and we're going to grade all 5 of these with how the Dolphins did next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. All right, so let's go for more dogs, and I'm looking exclusively at incoming talent because I do think Jalen Ramsey outgoing, I think, has that element to his persona, probably in a way in which the Dolphins were not able to fully harness to get the best version of, right? I think it's probably fair to say. But I'm looking exclusively at new names on the roster. Are they dogs? Are they established as dogs type of personas? I think as a wide receiver, I would classify Nick Westbrook-Ikhine as that. I think he has that physical component. Is he a game-changing, temperature-setting player? Probably not. So it's that kind of blurry line between like more physical is a very clearly objective thing, where dogs is a little bit more subjective. Farrell Brown, more physical for sure. Dog, probably not. I think both James Daniels and Jonah Savaitanaya have a chance to be dogs. James Daniels, you looked at the tape that he put on in the first month of the season last year. If the Dolphins get anything close to that, even if they get 75% of that, it's going to be an upgrade on the interior offensive line. But Jonah, I think, has the opportunity to be a dog. I think Jordan Phillips has an opportunity to be a dog. And I know he got drafted in the 5th round because he doesn't have a great pass rush profile and he doesn't have great length. But for all of the maturity that you hear about, the intensity in which he hungers and craves the game, and you hear a lot of the same things for Kenneth Grant, you got big, mean, powerful guys that have physicality to their game, are highly intelligent, and eat, sleep, and breathe football. I think that has a chance to be a very big difference as far as kind of the tonality in which that group plays with alongside Zach Sealer, who in his own right is a dog. I think Minkah Fitzpatrick has the right frame of mind to tie this room together. And I think that this has been a big part of the problem the Dolphins have had is between Xavier Howard, Jalen Ramsey. There's a lot of big personality. There's a lot of confidence. And then the safeties that are coming in is Javon's been worried about getting paid. And then it's Elliott, and Elliott's got bad things to say. And it's Poyer, and Poyer's got bad things to say. And Poyer was supposed to be the guy that ties it all together. And it's like, well, we just can't slap a new guy in there and address the problem. So now we need to change the entire complexity of the room. I think Minkah, with the reworked room around him, can probably have the secondary playing through the same set of eyes. Is that a dog? It depends on Minkah. I know I'm a little apprehensive just based off of what it looked like last time he was here, and but he's a multi-time All-Pro player. Played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, played a brand of football for the Pittsburgh Steelers that they were very proud of. If you get that version of Minkah, then yeah, I think that can be an upgrade for you. And that would be a huge step in the right direction based off of the entirety of the secondary and the problems that you had, presumably from afar, for what you could see. So dogs is kind of subjective, and dogs is also going to be hard to tell until we get these guys in pads and get them out on the field, which thankfully is going to start on a little over a week. But first training camp practice is in less than a week. I'll be there. Looking forward to it. So let's grade these 5 off-season objectives. I think from a cap health perspective, you didn't restructure your major contracts. You offloaded Jalen Ramsey, Teron Armstead contracts. You have mitigated prorated money into future years. You have non-guaranteed money for your big salaries that replace the guaranteed salaries that you had for multiple years. I think from this perspective, it's probably an A-. Now, I think what it looks like year over year is tough because we don't know. We don't have a lot of confidence in the stability of those that are running the organization. But threading the needle from that perspective and that cash versus cap conversation, I think that this was probably the best job that they did, was the fiscal responsibility element of it. And I know that it's frustrating, and some people think they just closed the checkbook and they said, you're not allowed to spend any more money. As far as mitigating injury risk, I would say this is probably a C. And this is part of the problem and challenge with trying to be cost conscientious is you find talent that's available, but available at a certain budget because they have the red tape. So they have always been everybody gets hurt in football type mentality. And to a certain degree, I agree with that. But to a certain degree, I kind of wish you just leave it well enough alone and go get a bunch of guys that have played a lot of football, right? And are annually playing a lot of football. So I'd say this was a C. I do think some of the offloaded talent, particularly left tackle with Teron, with the annual frustrations that came with a guy who was an absolute warrior and played through a lot, but had a lot to play through. I think you have a chance to be a lot more stable there. You still have Austin Jackson coming back into the fray, but as a guy who's dealt with injuries, you still have Phillips and Sealer, or Phillips and Chubb. The Tua Tagovailoa question will not go away until he allows it to go away by making smart decisions and controlling what he can control and staying healthy through the things he can't control. Let's get physical. I would say this is probably a B. I look at the interior defensive line, the interior offensive line, the ancillary players at all the skill spots. And I would probably say the center of your back seven is definitely more physical, with like your backup linebackers with Britt and Melifonwu and Trader and Minkah. I think you're more physical in the center of the back seven. So I'd give that a B. If it was just going to be trenches, I'd probably give it a B+. Get younger. I don't think there's any doubt that they did this well. I would probably put this at probably B+ as well. This would be higher if it wasn't for your answers at the beginning of July being 29-year-old Minkah Fitzpatrick, or soon to be 29-year-old Minkah Fitzpatrick, and Darren Waller. And they're obviously, at least Waller is presumably a short-term solution, but they do change the average age of the team relative to, I understand you're trying to collect talent while getting more physical and mitigating injury risk and salary cap at the same time, right? Like you can't have utopian solutions in every spot for every spot on the roster. So I get that. But I'd say it's probably a B+ for getting younger. And it got worse with Minkah and Waller down the stretch, although I think it gives you an opportunity to be more talented. And I certainly think, at least with Minkah, you have a chance to have added another dog This one is an incomplete grade for me. Just because, again, I would like to see these guys get out on the field before I make firm determinations on who is setting the temperature for the team. So ranging from C's to A's, depending on what part of this offseason plan you're looking at. Will it work? Of course, we need to be patient to find out. But that's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always. Check out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'll be back to talk to you all again soon. Go Fins.